How's it going? I'm back again with another video. I'm sorry you just had to watch me do that really cringy intro. Anyway, today I'm going to be teaching you how to do a hyperlapse, which is basically just a moving time lapse. Now this is really popular in a lot of trendy YouTube videos nowadays, and I actually did it a couple times on my year 2020 video. If you haven't seen that, go click the link in the top right. And at this point, most YouTubers would probably say, oh, I got a lot of questions on this asking how you do this hyperlapse, how did you do this? No, nobody asked me how to do it. I'm just making it anyway because they look cool. First off, what do you actually want to shoot a hyperlapse for? Well, they usually work best for like tall structures, stuff like churches, tall buildings. So for right now, if you look here, we've got the Rhode Island State House, which I did in the my year 2020 video. This is a perfect subject for a hyperlapse. And if you haven't seen that hyperlapse, Nick actually shot it, but one of my favorite hyperlapses ever. But yeah, just make sure when you're shooting a hyperlapse, you have a good subject to shoot, aka your building or whatever you're shooting. Now, the camera settings you have to use when you're doing this. Make sure you are in full manual mode. You need to be in full control, because if you put it on auto settings, when you run those images back, you're gonna see a lot of changing in exposure, and it's just gonna look bad. So for me right now, my shutter speed is 1/350. I'm shooting at f8. The reason I am shooting at f8 is so I can get as much of this scene in focus as possible. ISO 100, so we don't have as much grain in the image, and also very important, keep your white balance locked. Don't shoot with auto white balance. You're gonna get the same thing from moving from blue to orange through your image, and that's not gonna look good. And also manual focus. You wanna lock your focus on your subject. Probably the most important thing when you're setting your camera settings for your hyperlapse is make sure you have a visible grid line on your camera. So for me, I have this complicated grid. I don't know if you can actually see this right here, but I have one that crosses in the middle, and it's just got a bunch of different lines to divide it. And that just makes sure I can put something on one of those corners. So for right now, we're actually focusing on the statue at the top there, and I'm lining it up on one of the grid corners so that it stays in the same spot. That just makes sure you have a nice stable hyperlapse when you go back in editing. And we'll go over that later, how you're gonna stabilize that. In terms of the actual shooting process, so for me right now, I'm doing a lateral hyperlapse. I'm moving side to side. For most of you guys will probably be doing a like forward hyperlapse or backward hyperlapse. Just make sure that you're kind of moving in a straight line if possible. So when you're ready to actually take your photos, you can start, take one, and make sure you're doing the same amount of steps in between each shot. So I'm just gonna do one like big step like that. And we're gonna take another one, line it up on the grid line. And I'm just gonna repeat that process for this whole little sidewalk section. And I'm just moving side to side. You guys can do the same thing if you're moving forward or backward. But yeah, just make sure you're moving in incremental steps so it doesn't look like it jumps or comes back or whatnot. So another tip that I just thought of as I'm shooting this hyperlapse right now is that if you're in a situation with a lot of moving things, like we're in a city right now, so if we were on like the road where there's a lot of moving cars, people crossing the street, stuff like that, you can set your shutter speed nice and low to something like 1/60 or even lower than that. So you get some like natural motion blur in the camera, and that's just gonna look really nice when you bring it into editing. But yeah, if you're looking for motion blur, crank that shutter down a little bit. But there's not really any moving parts in this one, so I'm not doing that today. Okay, another tip that I just thought of while I was shooting this, and I kind of just subconsciously did, I flipped my camera into single shot mode instead of the traditional like high speed shutter. And that's just so I don't accidentally click twice in the same spot, so we don't have any like duplicate frames when we're editing these. And if you do realize that you're like messing up on a photo, you just have like one to delete rather than like a burst or something like that. So I just finished shooting the hyperlapse. That actually took way less time than I thought it would. Some of these, depending on the hyperlapse that you're shooting, might take a little while, so you're gonna have to be patient and be meticulous and just keep going with it until it's done. Something you can do to check if the hyperlapse looks good is you can hit like the playback button on your camera, and you can just use the scroll wheel and scroll through your photos so it's like a simulated moving image. And for me, it looks good. So I know I nailed it. Another thing that I just thought of that I did with my camera settings is I put the aspect ratio into 16:9. Now, most cameras in their photo modes by default will have an aspect ratio of 3:2, which is a little bit bigger on the top and bottom than 16:9. And the reason I put it into 16:9 is because when I am shooting these photos, they are going to be used for a video, which is a 16:9 aspect ratio. That'll just be easier for me when editing. However, I also set my camera to shoot raw photos. That's another important one. Don't use JPEG, shoot raw. I know it's gonna be a lot for a file size, but it's worth it, trust me. Since I am shooting raw, I can still go back and fix the aspect ratio on all of those photos back to 3:2 so that I can move it up or down if I want to. But that's just another little helpful tip. Now for the rest of the video, we're going back to editing sand. Let's go.
So, yeah, I filmed that last part like 3 months ago and kind of forgot about this video until then. Actually, I did try to film this video once, but something messed up with my screen recorder, and now I'm jumping back to it. So anyway, let's pick up where I left off. So first thing you want to do is you want to import your photos into Lightroom. Now, as you can see on my screen here, I already edited them because, like I said, I recorded this video once already. So if I hit R on my keyboard here, you can see that even when I chose my 16:9 aspect ratio in my camera, since I shot raw, I still have access to that full 3:2 image if I wanted it. I'm just going to keep it at 16:9 now since that's the aspect ratio for video. But as you can see, through a simple little edit on it. So what you want to do once you throw your edit on the first photo is you want to click the first photo, scroll all the way to the end here, and you're going to hold shift and click the end, and then you can right click, develop settings, sync settings, and then you can choose what to synchronize. I'm not going to do that now because I've already done that to all these photos, but basically they'll start synchronizing for a little while. So now once you have all these settings attached to all the photos, you can right click again since they're all still selected, hit export, and now this is where it gets interesting. So you're going to choose a file location. You want to make sure you have a separate folder for your edited photos. So I have a hyperlapse edited photos. Again, as you can see right here, I've already exported these, but if I was going to export them again, I'd put them in this edited folder. So I hit select. Now come down to file naming. Now this is probably the most important step. Check rename to, and we're going to change that to hyperlapse. Now you can see I have custom name sequence selected. So what it automatically does when you export, it'll export that name with the number of the photos. So the first photo will be hyperlapse-1, second hyperlapse-2, and so on. And basically you can leave the rest the same. I tend to prefer to export it at full quality just because it gives me like, I believe like an 8K hyperlapse since I have a 24 megapixel camera. You can downsize that if you want, but I choose to just keep it full quality. Then you hit export. So now once all the photos have exported, we're going to head into Adobe After Effects. Now the reason I'm opening After Effects instead of Premiere is because After Effects has a feature called Track Stabilizer, and Adobe, you only have access to the Warp Stabilizer. So we're going to create a new project. We're going to import our stuff here. Now I'm just going to navigate to this hyperlapse edited. So what you're going to do is once you're in this file location right here, you're going to click on the first photo and see down here how it says importer JPEG sequence. We're going to want that checked because what it will do is it will take all these photos and merge it into a video before we even need to do anything. So hit import. So as you can see in the sequence here, the frame rate is 30 frames per second. We want it at 24 frames per second. So we're going to hit interpret footage, main, and instead of 30 frames per second, we're going to hit 23.976, and we're going to hit OK. And now we're just going to create a new composition with that. So as you can see, scrub through here quickly, you can see we've got our image sequence, and After Effects will be a little bit slow with this just because we exported it at full resolution. You choose to down res it, you won't have the same problem. So yeah, as you can see, our hyperlapse is shaky, so we need to stabilize it. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna come down here on the right hand side to tracker. If you don't have that, you can go up to window and check the tracker option. And we're gonna do stabilize motion. So now it's gonna create a track point. We're gonna zoom in, we're gonna make that track point a lot bigger. We're gonna move it up to the top here. Now with After Effects Tracker, you want to pick a point of high contrast. Since we focus on the top of the state house here for the hyperlapse, we're going to track there to stabilize it. So what you can do here now is you can just, since we're at the beginning, we can hit analyze forward and it's just gonna do its thing. Now you can see we've already lost the point. So I'm just gonna go back to the beginning here. I'm just gonna go frame by frame to see where it lost the motion. And it looks like right there it slid down a little bit. So what we're just gonna do is we're just gonna move that tracking point up and we're just gonna analyze by 1 frame. And I'm gonna keep analyzing by 1 frame just so I can keep adjusting the track point. And so now you can just repeat this process for the whole thing. I'll speed this up now. Now we finished tracking that point on the sequence. So what we can do is we can just play it forward one more time just to double check that it's fine, and it is. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna hit apply, X and Y, okay. And now we've kind of got a half stabilized hyperlapse. So as you can see, there's like some black bars around the top here. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna use warp stabilizer within After Effects. So what we have to do is we have to pre-compose this layer. We'll just call it hyperlapse. And then just make sure you check move all attributes to a new composition. Gonna hit OK. And now what we can do is we can scroll over to our effects and presets panel. We're gonna look up warp stabilizer and we're gonna throw that on. And now we're just gonna let After Effects analyze the clip. And this will take a little while since it's such a heavy file size because we exported it at full resolution. But if you have a good enough computer, I would definitely recommend doing it like this. All right, so now we can play that back. And After Effects is gonna struggle a little bit at first. That's just because it needs to kind of like render through. When we play it back, and look at that. We've got a perfectly stable hyperlapse. The one thing that I did in my hyperlapse specifically that kind of gives away that it's still a little shaky is the fact that I've got these, if we zoom in here, I've got these like specks on my lens sensor. And you can only see that because we shot at a high aperture when I was taking the photos. If you can avoid it, make sure your sensor is clean so you don't have a hyperlapse that looks quite like this. I think it did a pretty good job stabilizing. So now since our hyperlapse is stabilized, we're ready to export it. I'm gonna hit Control M on our keyboard. The render panel will come up and After Effects does a pretty good job at having the settings right already. So we're going to hit render. And just make sure before you hit render, you have the correct file location selected. I did, so I didn't show you that, but it's just gonna render through and boom, you're done. You have an exported hyperlapse. So now since that's all done, this is what the final thing looks like. So that's it for this tutorial today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And if you found this helpful, make sure you leave a like and let me know down in the comments section below. Also, give me some suggestions on some future videos. Always keen to see what you guys have to say. Also, make sure you subscribe if you enjoy my content. Follow me on Instagram for more. With that all said and done, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.